And welcome back to 101 East, where we're discussing multiculturalism, particularly in Australia. In the studio, I'm joined by Yasser Solomon from the Victorian Multicultural Commission and Ian Nelson, Federal Senate candidate for the One Nation Party. In Melbourne, I'm joined by Voula Messimerri, who's the chair of FECCA, the Federation of Community Councils of Australia. Thank you all for staying with us. I was trawling the internet a couple of days ago, and I came across a site which seemed fairly genuine. It didn't actually say where it was from, but it contained a degree of debate about the issue and a series of questions about Australianism, which designed to prepare potential citizen applicants for the citizenship test. And among the usual things of like, can you name some historical dates in Australia and can you sing the national anthem? There was an interesting question, which was, give 3 Australian colloquialisms for swimming suit. And I'll give you some of the options. Budgie smugglers, cozzies, swimmers, togs. Now, I just want to ask, are these the sort of questions, Voula, let me put this to you, are these the sort of questions that really determine whether one is part of a culture or not?
Well, absolutely not. I think that we do need to say, though, it is important for all of us, new migrants to Australia and refugees, as well as Australians who have been here for decades, to have some sort of shared understanding and knowledge of what Australia is about, but also about what the rest of the world is about as well. I think that we can become quite facetious about the sort of knowledge, if you like, that will make us Australians. Certainly as people who come from all around the world, over 200 different countries, to make Australia a home, I think it is important to be given every opportunity, economically, socially, civic-wise, to become engaged with all facets of Australia.
We can't, Yasser, really avoid the reality, though, that there are a large number of expatriate communities that arrive in countries like Australia and other countries and make a very strong point of maintaining their own cultural identity, often at the expense of the community in which they're living, or at least often at odds with the community in which they're living. That is true, is it not?
For some it is, but I don't think it's as big a problem as is made out to be in some sectors of the media or by some politicians. I think some of them may have the appearance of belonging to some particular way of life overseas, but when it comes to it, they're all trying to build a common future here for their children, for themselves, to find a safe place.
But if that common future doesn't involve adopting some of the values of the place in which you're living, then there is going to be a problem.
Of course there's going to be a problem if they don't adopt the common values, but I think most of them do.
Ian, you don't, obviously.
I don't obviously agree with that. I agree with most of what he says.
Well, why does your party platform say One Nation will abolish multiculturalism and the Racial Discrimination Act?
Well, you'll find that the multiculturalism word has actually been abolished from legislation. That was done a couple of months ago.
But you're saying you will abolish multiculturalism with a small m. What does that mean?
Well, I beg your pardon. OK, what that actually means is we will not use the word multiculturalism anymore, and we'll use diversified races or diversified cultures. And for the reason for that is being, if you've got a multicultural country, Australia's going to lose. We assume that people from overseas that are looking at our country will say, oh, that means they haven't got an Australian culture. And that's not true. 85% of the Australians, they insist that they keep their cultures, and so we should. I mean, our fathers and their fathers actually fought for it. And this thing about, because suddenly we've got migration happening in Australia, that suddenly we're going to be doing trade. For heaven's sakes, we've been doing trade for 100 years. So, that doesn't wash with us.
Well, is there not an element of irony here? And by that I mean every culture that works harder to maintain its own uniqueness, if you like, is by definition almost excluding others, is part of the problem. Not that the foreigners are not assimilating in Australia, but the Australians don't really want to take them on board.
Well, I really think that, perhaps we're sort of going down blind alleys here. Let's look at some realities in Australia. 40 or 50 years ago, Australia was a very different place after World War II than it is today. Australia today is a wonderful blend of many different cultures, including the indigenous cultures, but also the new arrivals. Greeks, Italians, people from former Yugoslavia, Turkey, all over the world have actually added and blended wonderfully, both in terms of the cuisine, the broader culture, restaurants, sport, all sorts of different areas. And I think that we are therefore a much more vibrant, cosmopolitan and open society than we were 40 or 50 years ago. I think that we are sort of really talking across purposes. And if I can sort of just perhaps broach on a couple of issues that Ian perhaps has just talked about. Anti-discrimination, can you imagine what that would be like to actually abolish anti-discrimination laws that is there to actually protect the human rights and to protect people from being unduly disadvantaged because of their gender, because of their disability or race? I think that would put us
okay, well, I've got to say to you that the reason why we want to do that is I guess you remember the riots just recently at the beach down in Sydney. Cronulla. I'd like to see, I suggest to you that you go walk down that area overnight time and see how you get on. The fact of the matter is that the reason why this has been happening is because these young men from Lebanon have been running riot in that area and around Bankstown, right throughout Sydney. People are terrified of these gangs. And this is all caused because the police have not been able to pursue them, because if they actually described their race, then they were discriminating. And that's an absolute nonsense to say anything like that.
You're saying the failure of the police force to deal with this is simply because of a couple of words in the legislation?
It's the failures of the governments to allow legislation like this to seep through. I mean, for heaven's sakes, the Labor governments of this country are causing unbelievable problems right throughout this country.
Yes, sir. You respond to that.
These young people that Ian described as being Lebanese, they're Australian-born. And the reality is that you've had indications that there are building tensions there that haven't been addressed for a long time. And it's the issue of these unaddressed tensions, the not resolving the conflicts when you first see them. And by all means, discuss the issues regarding cultures and race, but do it in a respectful way, not abolish anti-discrimination laws.
Voula, your thoughts?
The reality is that Cronulla, hard as it was for Australia to recognise that we did have such an event, it's a very isolated event, and in terms of our history, and we need to keep it in perspective. Secondly, I do agree with Yasser very much, if I could just finish, I do agree with Yasser very much that I think we need to look at education, we need to look at social exclusion, and we need to make certain that we don't treat people who were born here in Australia as the other. I think that will take us definitely in the wrong direction. We need to put resources and very proper thinking around these types of problems.
All right, let's try and spin it forward and look at a potential future that will eliminate some of the problems. Voula, does that future involve actually discriminating against various races, such as the decision to limit the number of African refugees coming in?
Well, if I could just approach the topic in this way, Australia should have a right to actually change from time to time on the basis of need where it receives its intake of refugees from, because we do have international responsibilities to acquit in relation to that. However, I take great exception to the Minister's comments that indicated that the reason why Australia is not going to take African refugees is because they do not settle well. Let us just remember why we're taking refugees in the first place and why refugees exist. We cannot pick and choose our refugees on the basis of whether they settle. Once we accept people here, we have a human right responsibility, if you like, to ensure that they settle and they settle peacefully, given the fact that they are refugees.
Yeah, so the future looks how to you?
Well, it all depends on how we deal with the present. It depends whether we can start relating to people in respectful ways and not, especially with governments and some sectors of the media, putting out messages that create an us against them type of worldview. The more we can embrace the newer communities, the minorities, the more we'll have a one nation of Australia, a real one nation.
Yeah, but what's your perspective on the African refugees?
Well, first, I agree with everything you say there. That's wonderfully said, and we agree with that. The media really are the instigators of all the trouble, and nobody else.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to pursue that. That's an interesting accusation. But
yes.
The African refugee situation?
It's a paradox. It's a very difficult one. I agree with Voula. They're refugees, for heaven's sakes. We have signed off to the United Nations treaties, and we must keep to our word and honour that agreement. and we must accept refugees. Government education is a wonderful thing. We could do that. We could spend some money on education to help them assimilate.
And you believe in an Australia with zero immigration?
Oh, I do. Well, net zero immigration, and that is to say, like, how many 40,000, 50,000 leave Australia per year, then allow 40 to 50,000 in to Australia. This is reviewable, of course.
All right. Obviously a very vexed topic, and one that, that has a great deal of future debate left in it. Unfortunately, we don't have time to indulge in that. Thank you very much, all of you, for being with us today. That's all we have time for on this edition of 101 East. Until the next time, bye-bye.